Now here's a group of non-viruses, non-bacteria pathogens. Pathogens meaning they cause suffering. Many of these are associated with improper disposal of human feces, but not all of them. The first group are the amoeboid protozoans, and they're known for their pseudopod. If you break that word down, pseudo means false, and pod, like a podiatrist, means feet. And that means they sort of slither around with temporary feet. Entamoeba histolytica is a famous member of the amoebic protozoans because they cause amoebic dysentery. It's very common in many tropical areas, such as here in Egypt, where I was surprised at the amount of organisms in the water. Resistant cyst stage passes through the stomach unharmed, but the cyst stage is going to divide into its adult trophozoite stage. And you'll see many of these parasites have a trophozoite stage. And here it's going to migrate into the intestines, liver, and lungs and cause damage. Eventually the trophozoites are going to lay eggs. They're going to pass out of the feces and infect someone else. The symptoms tend to be diarrhea, blood, and mucus in the stools. And along with this, dehydration. I was amazed when I caught this in Africa. I had so much diarrhea that I just sat on a bucket until I finally made some diapers out of some old t-shirts, got to a doctor, and was completely healed of this one. Moving on, the sporozoans have a resistant spore stage. Malaria is famous as a sporozoan because the sporozoite stage is going to move into the human host when a mosquito takes a blood meal. From here, the sporozoite is going to move into the bloodstream and travel to the liver. And the liver is doing its job, but unfortunately, it gets damaged. In the liver, the parasite enters the merozoite stage. And here they're going to divide and break down liver tissue. Finally, the merozoites burst out of the liver and move into the bloodstream. And we get the major symptoms, which are alternating fever and then chills. It's really striking. I've seen it. At 1 minute, they're sweating, dripping with sweat. And then a few minutes later, their teeth are chattering as their temperature plummets. Finally, the gamete stage is when the host's blood is infected and another mosquito feeds and takes up some of the gametocytes, and they're going to travel to another host. Flagellates, they are protozoans that have a flagella, which means whip, and they use that to swim with. Many of them have a trophozoite stage and a cyst stage. One common organism is Giardia, and its cysts are released in the feces of various animals. Not just humans, but beavers, raccoons, lots of wildlife. And it travels in the water, and then we drink it, and then the cysts are going to divide into trophozoites that gradually destroy the intestines, and sometimes we don't even know what's happening. The symptoms may be very mild. Another member of the flagellates are the Trichomonas vaginalis. That second part of the name gives you an indication. It's a type of STD, usually transmitted sexually, although occasionally people pick it up some other way, perhaps toilet seats. That's pretty rare. It's rare because this one lacks a cyst stage, and so it's very fragile. It can't survive very long outside of our body. It can result in sterility in women if it's left untreated. Another flagellate is called the trypanosomes, and they're really distinctive because they are flattened, but their flagella is attached to the body, almost like a fin. Trypanosoma brucei, sometimes it's called T. brucei, causes the famous African sleeping sickness, and it's transmitted by the tsetse fly. I've been bitten by these guys. It hurts, but they don't all carry the trypanosome. The symptoms of this are just generally chronic fatigue, lowered immunity, and generally not fatal. The person may die of some other disease. Trypanosoma cruzi causes Chagas disease. This one is spreading. The intermediate host is a reduvid bug. And this bug, you can see a picture here, bites an infected animal, such as a human, but it might be some other animal, a raccoon or coati. And the Trypanosome cruzi moves into the insect. The trophozoite stage multiplies like crazy, so these bugs have thousands of tiny parasites in it. When the bug comes at night, it's going to bite the thin tissues of the skin, usually around the mouth and the eyes. Its nickname is called kissing bug. It infects several million people each year in the Americas. Then it's going to deposit its feces when it bites. And the natural thing to do when you're asleep and you get a little pinch is to scratch. But unfortunately, that scratching is going to embed the bug's feces into your wound. And now you're infected, and then later a bug bites you and then spreads it to someone else. Symptoms are very serious, including heart and brain damage. The Chagas disease was such a problem when I worked in the Amazon that we would put cans full of water and put our bedposts in these cans of water, so then if the bugs tried to get to us at night, they would drown in the water when they were trying to climb up the bedpost. So that's a good trick for you. Platyhelminthes, that word platy means flat, helminth means worm. Their body is flattened, and many of them have suckers for attachment to the host's internal organs. Wow, that's a handsome looking specimen. The blood fluke Schistosoma mansoni infects so many people. It causes the disease schistosomiasis, and it's going to damage the liver and the kidneys over time. Human sewage, warm water, provide excellent habitat for the larval blood flukes. These larvae are going to develop in an intermediate host, which is an aquatic snail. They live in there for a while, and then they burst through the snail's shell as a second stage called cercaria. And once they're swimming cercaria, they penetrate the human skin. You get a little rash, a little red rash, and we become the definitive host. And it weakens us, but it's usually not fatal. In my 2 years in Africa, whenever there was water, I would always scoop up a handful and look at the snails. And if there was holes in the snail shells, then I certainly didn't go swimming that day. Tapeworms, they're another type of flatworm, so let's keep your notes squared away. They have a head-like region called a scolex. We don't call it a head because they don't have eyes or ears or anything like that. It's called a scolex. And the scolex has both suckers and hooks for attaching to the intestinal wall of hosts such as us. And then behind the scolex are proglottids, and these contain hundreds of eggs. Now, tapeworm infections are not very serious. You lose some weight, but otherwise, the problem occurs when there's so many that they block internal organs, and then they have to be surgically removed. Our beef industry, though, in this country is marvelous and very safe. Nematode, another group of worms, but these are the roundworms, and these guys are often not so nice. They have a tough outer cuticle, which survives our hydrochloric acid in our stomach. One group are called the pinworms, probably the most common roundworm infection in the U.S. They cause enterobiasis, named after the worm Enterobius. It lives as an adult worm in the rectum or the colon of a human. Life cycle, well, while an infected person sleeps, the female pinworm is going to depart the rectum, and she deposits her eggs on the perianal region. Peri means around the anus. Now, these eggs cause the host to scratch because they irritate that tender perianal region. And so the host is going to scratch and itch, and those are the symptoms. And unfortunately, as they drag their finger along the perianal region, they're going to collect eggs under the fingernails, and then other people get them. Now this photograph, one way to, it's always hard to diagnose if a child has this disorder, because you can either put a sticky tape across the perianus before bedtime and explain to them what's going on, or you can use a flashlight in the middle of the night, which is probably a little more scary for them. Always use surgical gloves when you're working around patients like this. Pork roundworm, these guys are really quite evil. It's one of the reasons we don't order rare pork. We can order rare beef, but not pork. And here's why. If a pig consumes infected fecal matter, then, in which I've seen it in Nepal, I've seen pigs, infected pigs, the nurse cell trichinella larvae are going to form tiny cysts in the pig muscle. And they're so very tiny that you can't see them in the slaughterhouse, right? You need a microscope, and you can't examine every inch of meat, so you just have to assume it's contaminated. The trichinella larvae are released when the human eats raw pork with nurse cells. Now, that is again why we don't eat rare pork. Here's the life cycle. Then I'm going to give you the short version. Newborn larvae migrate through the body, using the bloodstream for transport. Now here's the bad part. They're not going to stay happy in the GI tract of a human. They're going to start to puncture organs and move throughout the body. Sometimes they end up in the brain. Certainly they cause a lot of internal bleeding and sometimes death. Right? So these guys are... when I treat pork, now our swine industry in the U.S. is very, very clean, but I still treat pork with respect. Filariasis. This is a third group of roundworms. Now, we don't see these in the U.S., but they are out there in other areas of the world. Wucheria is the nematode that's going to block the lymph nodes. And when this happens, the lymph nodes can no longer maintain the proper fluid levels in the body. And so what happens is that lymph fluid, is going to accumulate in an appendage, and so the other name is elephantiasis because the appendages look swollen. I guess they look elephant-like. It's called lymphedema when the lymph node is blocked. Easy to treat though, and transmitted by mosquitoes. Arthropod is the sixth group. So these are, if you look at that word, we know pod, but arthro, these are the animals with exoskeletons. That means an external skeleton that provides them with support and protection. The chelicerates are probably they're one of the most famous. These are the spiders. And they have chelicerae, which is another word for fang, that injects a protein venom. Okay, most venoms and poisons and toxins are proteins, and that's why we have such a difficult time with them. All chelicerates within this group have a cephalothorax, which is the head and thorax region, and an abdomen. So they have two body regions. Now, chelicerates are predators of many insects. So yeah, they're destroying mosquitoes and cockroaches, and so for the most part, we want to applaud these guys when they scuttle by. We want to say, "Hey, way to go, champ!" There's only two that we need to be worried about, and here they are. Black widow injects a neurotoxin that's going to affect the central nervous system. I've been bitten and I get a backache and a headache, and I feel kind of sick for a while. But it is a problem for senior citizens or children or people that have are immunocompromised. Here's the adult female with that red hourglass, although it's not always that shape. When they're young, their bodies are kind of brown with swirls. And there's the big egg sac. Also, when you run your finger through a black widow web, it makes a crackling sound, whereas cellar spiders don't make that sound. Okay, brown recluse. You will probably never see one of these in your life. A lot of people like to blame this spider on all sorts of things. They inject something different than the black widow. It's a digestive protein. And so what happens is it digests a little bit of tissue. And if a person's not very smart, that open hole is going to become septic with Staphylococcus aureus bacteria, and the thing festers, and it's a big problem. But really, if people would just take care of their sore, this wouldn't happen. Acarians, these are still a type of arthropod, and they include the ticks, especially local deer tick, that can inject a spirochete bacteria when taking a blood meal. And rarely, in our area at least, it's pretty rare, Lyme disease may cause initially you get a sort of a bullseye red rash at the area of the tick bite, but that's not so bad. It's the later symptoms, such as joint inflammation and muscle paralysis, that can cause serious problems. Insects as vectors, I've already mentioned several instances, but let's continue on. One insect that transmits a fair number of diseases is a mosquito. And dengue fever is when an injected flavivirus from a mosquito flows into the bloodstream of the host. It's sometimes called backbreak fever because you get a high fever and sharp pains in the joints and muscles. I've never had this one, but I have seen victims of it, and it looks painful. The flavivirus is kind of weird because it's studded with E proteins, and I'm going to slow down here just so you understand it. They're going to attach to the surface of our own immune cells, our monocytes. So here we have a virus that's going to block our immune cells with proteins, and now our monocytes can't fight other invaders. And so our body's defenses become overwhelmed. And then inside our own monocyte, the virus is going to go through a lytic pathway, and it's going to make more of these viruses, and then it's going to spread, get into the body fluids. A mosquito bites the victim and transmits it to someone else. That's no fun. West Nile virus. Many people are infected with this right here in California, transmitted by mosquitoes. Most people don't have symptoms, though. Say about 70 to 80% of the people infected with West Nile, they don't develop symptoms. And really, we're not the main host for this virus anyway. It's mostly a bird virus, but we get incidental infection from infected mosquitoes. There are severe symptoms. Less than 1% of the people who are infected are going to experience neurological illness, such as encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain, or meningitis, which is swelling of the meninges around the CNS. There's no real vaccine or antiviral treatment currently for West Nile virus, although it's being worked on. So typically what we do is we treat the symptoms, okay? You're not going to cure the person, but you can treat the symptoms, and they may have to be hospitalized, may have to have intravenous fluids, maybe some gamma globulin, pain medication, nursing care, whatever it takes, until their body overcomes this virus. It's almost too much to review, so let me just hit some highlights. Okay, these are non-viral. Well, actually there are some viral, aren't there? Let me go through them. Amoeboid protozoans, they have the false feet, the pseudopod. Entamoeba is the famous member. Causes dysentery, and it has a trophozoite and a cyst stage, which makes it pretty tough. Symptoms are blood and mucus and dehydration. The sporozoans, you think of malaria and the sporozoite that goes into the bloodstream, into the liver, and then starts bursting red blood cells, causing fever and chills. The flagellates have a whip-like flagella for swimming, and they have a trophozoite. Well, some don't have a cyst stage. Giardia certainly does. It can withstand all sorts of adverse conditions. It lives in the intestines part of its life. Now, Trichomonas vaginalis has no cyst stage, so it's pretty fragile. Tends to be sexually transmitted. The trypanosomes, there's a bunch. There's T. brucei, transmitted by the tsetse fly. There's Krusei, which is the one that's spreading in South America. Chagas disease, transmitted by the kissing bug, or the reduvid. On to the platyhelminthes, which means flatworms, and these include the flukes, which one causes schistosomiasis, and the tapeworm. Another group of worms, nematodes, that I don't like. Enterobiasis, that's the pinworm. Trichinosis, which is transmitted by trichinella, and that is the one that's going to move throughout the body, puncture organs, sometimes cause death. The arthropods, which I don't see the word here, but those are things like chelicerates. The black widow has a neurotoxin, and the brown recluse is going to have the digestive enzyme. Ticks can transmit a spirochete that causes Lyme disease, which starts off with just a rash, but then it may cause inflammation. And on to the flavivirus and dengue fever, and it looks like I ran out of space, but there's also West Nile virus. Man, that is a creepy bunch of critters.